so the last talk the title is Navigating DevOps Security Journey at Scale with OWASP SAMM 2.0 by Hardik Parekh. And thank you, Hardik, to be here. I just go to unmute your microphone. It takes some time, okay. So this Hardik has more than 16 years of experience in the security, particularly in the application security field, and he has helped organizations to develop mature security programs and the different organizations of different sizes. He also transformed the concept of DevOps organization into Dev Security Ops by integrated security engineering tools and continuous integration and continuous development pipelines. So two hot topics nowadays to keep the applications running, updated, and also secure. He also is also present in the software students maturity models and building the security maturity models projects from the OWASP. And also in this topic that of course is important. In my opinion, this is important for everyone, for the developers, everyone that participates in the software development lifecycle, as well for the leaders of the organization. So it's important because it's important to get the maturity, level of maturity in terms of software in this case, or in terms of cybersecurity in a broad range. So Hardik, you have your time now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. First, quick check. Can everybody hear me and see my slides?
Yes, I'm not seeing the slides yet, but we can hear you. You need to share.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Share screen option. The share screen option to share the slides. Yes, I'm seeing the background. And I'm seeing
now.
Okay.
Cool. All right. All right. Well, oi tudo bem? This is the only Portuguese I know. So hello and good evening, everyone. I know I'm the last one who's standing between you and your dinner tonight, so I'll try to be quick. So first of all, I wanted to thanks to BSidesPorto for having me here. I'm really excited to be here presenting on this topic, which is very near and dear to my heart, which is navigating DevOps security journey at scale with OWASP Operations Maturity Model, aka SAMM. I'm one of the core members of the OWASP SAMM projects. And first of all, before we go deep into the topic, I wanted to share a little bit about myself, my professional journey line, so you know where I'm coming from. So I started my career as a software engineer, and I got opportunity to kind of move into security in early 2000s. That led me to taking some of the roles at one of the most, I would say, prominent software organizations leading their software security programs, such as EMC, and then Intuit, Amazon, and Splunk. I'm also on the advisory board for a few security and data privacy startups, and a nonprofit trade organization, CompTIA, which is, many of you might have heard about security certifications such as Security Plus, CISA Plus, things like that. And CompTIA is the organization behind that. In addition to my professional contribution to the industry, throughout my career, I also contributed to various industry publications such as SafeCode. I also contributed to SANS Top 25 Programming Errors, CVSS version 3.0, BSIMM version 1, and many of the versions after that, OWASP SAMM, and recently NIST SSDF. So for those of you who might not be familiar with BSIMM, BSIMM is another software security model. It's called Building Security in Maturity Model, which is a little bit different from the OWASP SAMM. And that model is more descriptive in nature. By that, what I mean is it's basically tells you what are some of the other organizations are doing in terms of security activities at various levels. And OWASP SAMM will go much into the details for this talk. It's more about prescriptive, means it will give you guidance in terms of what an organization needs to be doing at which maturity level. I started contributing to OWASP SAMM project back in 2016, and have been one of the core members of the OWASP SAMM project ever since then. Now, before we start the talk, just wanted to get some legal stuff out of the way. So I'm not speaking on behalf of any of my current or previous employers, nor am I here to represent any of my current or previous employers. All the opinions shared here are solely my own, and they do not reflect those of my current or previous employers. Quick agenda. I assume many of you might not be familiar with the OWASP SAMM. Hence, I'll spend some time introducing what is OWASP SAMM, who is OWASP SAMM, why do we need a model like OWASP SAMM, core principles, and the project history. Once we know what is OWASP SAMM, I'll go into the details in terms of some of the changes that we introduced from version 1.5 to version 2. And last but not least, we'll discuss how you can apply SAMM in your organization to navigate this DevOps security journey at scale. And if you are playing one of these 15+ roles, you'll be able to take valuable information from this talk and apply that to your organization literally starting from tomorrow. And that's my goal, so that everybody is well versed on what is OWASP SAMM and how it can be applied. So who is OWASP SAMM? OWASP SAMM is the result of, at least especially the 2.0, is the result of hard work from this group of contributors around the globe over the past little over 3 years. And this group represents different geographies, companies of various sizes, consulting, product development, as well as academia. As a result of that, OWASP SAMM is very versatile and can be applied in companies of various sizes across the globe. What is OWASP SAMM? For those of you who might not be familiar to OWASP SAMM is one of the OWASP flagship projects, and the flagship project status is given to the projects with strategic importance to both OWASP as well as application security in general at OWASP. And OWASP SAMM is a framework for software assurance that provides effective and measurable way for all types of organizations to analyze and improve their software security posture that is tailored towards specific risks that that particular organization is facing. So there's no one-size-fits-all model. This is very fungible model, very flexible model. And SAMM is full of useful resources that will help with evaluating organizations' current security practices, providing recommendations and suggestions for growing and maturing those practices, and providing a way to demonstrate concrete improvements over the period of time, and defining and measuring security activities throughout the life cycle. One of the big benefits of SAMM is that it is vendor agnostic. Nobody is kind of paying any of us volunteers to put any material, so it's completely vendor agnostic. And SAMM can be done either in-house, or you could have one of the several AppSec firms help you with the assessment, creating a plan and creating roadmaps for your software assurance journey. Now, one would ask, why do we need a model like SAMM? In quest to increase speed in today's organization is growing in complexity with increasing number of tech stacks, growth of open source software, various deployment models, various org structures, and sometimes without even a clear requirements. As a result of that, almost 75% of the vulnerabilities are application related these days. And if you look at latest security breaches like Equifax or Capital One, they are more application related. And to standardize security activities in such a complex software development environment, we need a model like OWASP SAMM. I like this quote from George Box, who has been called one of the greatest critical minds of the 20th century. And this quote is something like this: the most that can be expected from any model is that it can supply a useful approximation to reality. All models are wrong and some models are useful. All models are wrong and some models are useful. The point here is that you can't find a model that will exactly describe the reality of your organization. There are too many variables in the real world. Plus, there are so many different types of org structures and different types of cultures and all those things. I work at various companies throughout my life and professional life, and every company I work at, they have their own nuances in terms of their culture, their maturity, their overall maturity in terms of IT, security, all of that. And that's why we cannot have a perfect model which can be applied to each and every organization. But you can have a model that is close enough to be useful, and that is what SAMM is aspiring to be. SAMM was defined with flexibility and versatility in mind, so that it can be utilized by small startups, mid-sized organizations, as well as very large corporations, using any type of development methodology, be it agile, iterative, or waterfall. Additionally, this model can be applied organization-wide for a single line of business, or even for an individual project. So it's really flexible from that point of view. You don't have to have the whole company following this model. You can definitely start small with one project, two projects, three projects. You can apply it to the line of business, and then you can scale it to the whole organization. So that's why it's very flexible and versatile. SAMM is both measurable and actionable. It defines maturity levels across various business functions and provides very clear-cut pathway for improving the maturity levels. This way, providing step-by-step navigation plan to achieve higher levels of maturity for your software assurance program. I'm not going to spend too much time on the project history, but it originally started, this SAMM project was actually started outside OWASP. It was originally created by a gentleman named Praveer Chandra. He's basically an independent software security consultant. But after 5-6 years, there was no more update to this project and all these things. So a group of people got together at OWASP Summit, and they worked together to breathe some life into this rather inactive open SAMM project, and they renamed it to OWASP SAMM project. The version 1.1, which came out in 2016, it kind of expanded and restructured the previous open SAMM model into 4 complementary resources: core document, how-to guide, quick start guide, a tools box, which is like a spreadsheet which helps you do the assessment and build a roadmap. And these are the resources that were added as part of version 1.1. Back in 2017, we released 1.5 version because we wanted to make some refinement to the scoring model as part of the assurance to provide more granularity to the scoring in the assessment. We just launched SAMM 2.0 in January of this year, where we have changed the measurement model one more time to add qualitative measurement to represent how well an organization is performing a security practice. So there are 2 dimensions now. One is coverage, and the other one is quality. Now, SAMM is built on few core principles. First, the organization's behavior changes slowly over time. Changes has to be smaller and iterative to really take hold and make a difference in organizations' software assurance maturity. Second, there are no single recipe that works for all organizations. SAMM is built with that in mind and supports an organization building a program that is tailored towards their particular risk profile, culture, and the current maturity. Third, the guidance related to security activities must be prescriptive. Too often, many security initiatives fail due to poor details, lack of communication, or invalid assumptions. Overall, the success of the program will be based on being simple, well-defined, and measurable. SAMM is defined in 3 levels of maturity. Of course, if you consider not doing any of the security activities which are described here, you could consider that as the 4th level, which is level 0. But essentially, those 3 levels are ad hoc provision of certain activities, security activity, increased efficiency, and comprehensive mastery at scale with automation. Unlike other maturity models and some of the SAMM's predecessors, there are 4 levels of assessment scores for each security activity, which makes it more fine-grained improvements visible. such as no implementation, implementation across few or some projects, implementation across at least half of the projects, and implementation across many or most projects. So as you can see, this is not like yes or no. Like, when you do the assessment, many of the models, they will say, in fact, some of the SAMM processes where like, do you do this security activity, yes or no? It's like a check mark, right? And we all know that in real life, the answer is somewhere in between. That's why we had to create this 4 levels of assessment scores. And also, a very important point I wanted to make here is at the highest level, we are saying the implementation across many or most projects. We are not saying all, because again, we want it to be pragmatic. And we all know that any organization you go to, like, accomplishing any security activities across all the projects is like almost like, never fulfilling promise. So what happens is, in the case of like, if you're planning to retire some applications, there's no point in investing more resources in improving their security maturity. And that is why we have this provision of many or most projects and not all projects. Just like Six Sigma or CMMI, the goal is not to max out on each and every practice. Honestly, that won't be even a good use of limited resources that you might have. What the target maturity should be for your organization is largely depending on the business drivers and the risks that your organization is facing. And that's how I would define the target maturity level. I would not try to score to go at level 3 in all of the areas, in all the companies across the globe. In 1.5, we have modified the scoring model to provide multiple choice answers, as I mentioned earlier, to provide more accurate assessment. But now, with this 2.0 version, we are making even further refinement to the existing scoring model to add another dimension of qualitative measurement to the scoring model. So as I mentioned earlier, these 2 dimensions are coverage, which I covered earlier, by means of questions. And we provide some of the resources in the Excel spreadsheet. There's a toolbox, what we call, where you can do the assessment yourself. So coverage will be covered by means of questions, and quality will be covered by means of mandatory criteria. So each question will have several mandatory criteria. And if you score 0 on any of the mandatory criteria, that means you would score 0 for that particular assessment. Now, let's look at the previous version of SAMM. I'm not going to spend too much time on this one because I would like to kind of go in detail for SAMM version 2.0, not 1.5. But at high level, SAMM is defined in 3 different levels. At the highest level, SAMM 1.5 was had defined 4 critical business functions. And each business function had 3 practices, security practices, and each security practice in turn had 3 maturity levels. Now, one would ask, what are the motivations behind coming up with the new version? Like, SAMM 1.5 was good enough. Why have to come up with a new version 2.0? So these are the top reasons we have. Number 1 was we wanted to align with last 4 or 5 years. The industry has moved more and more towards DevOps and Agile methodology from waterfall. And even though SAMM 1.5 or even other previous predecessors of SAMM were not defined with waterfall model in mind, what ended up happening was there are certain guidance were missing around some modern practices such as which are being used in CI/CD and Agile DevOps type of cultures, like such as build and deployment. Like everybody is kind of falling towards going towards CI/CD, right? Continuous integration and continuous deployment. And some of the practice guidance was missing. So as a result, we wanted to have a new version which has some guidance around those areas. So it kind of looks like that we also support DevOps and Agile practices. The second one was, as I mentioned earlier, we wanted to improve the measurement model by adding the qualitative aspects, because a lot of the feedback we got from across the globe was SAMM 1.5 and even the other version we were thinking in between 1.5 and 2.0, it still was going to have that same, I would say, pitfall where it would tell you whether you are performing this activity or not. So it's only going to cover coverage, but not the quality, how well you are performing that particular activity, security activity. The third reason was there are some structural changes in the framework which we wanted to make, such as in 1.5 and predecessor versions of SAMM, we had not intentionally, but we have designed it in a way where certain activities, security activities, were orphaned and unrelated. Like for example, code signing. It was like there was nothing at level 1 or nothing at level 3, but it will be like at level 2, it will say do code signing. So there was no kind of like direct relation between level 1, 2, and 3. And it kind of felt like that activity was more like an orphan activity. We wanted to address that particular aspect. We also wanted to arrange maturity levels in increasing order of difficulty. And that was another pitfall or shortcoming of the previous SAMM versions was there are times where, and we as a SAMM practitioners, we also noticed that ourselves, where it was very easy to do level 3 activity, but it was difficult to do level 2 activity or sometimes even level 1 activity, which doesn't make sense because maturity level by definition, like as you go higher level of maturity, there should be higher level of implementation cost and there should be higher order of increasing difficulty. So that was also another shortcoming. Last but not least, we all wanted to improve the production process that we were using itself, and we were also using more of a waterfall model and not agile iterative model. So these are some of the main motivations behind coming up with the new version of SAMM. And here's the core framework, what we call is SAMM 2.0 core framework. At high level, and the areas highlighted are changes from SAMM 1.5, which we'll cover in a few minutes. So SAMM 2.0 is defined again in 3 different levels. At the highest level, SAMM defines 5 critical business functions. Each business function is a category of activities related to the nuts and bolts of software development process. Each business function SAMM defines, there are 3 security practices. Each security practice is an area of security-related activities that build assurance for the respective business function. For each security practice, SAMM defines 3 maturity levels as objectives to be accomplished. Each level within a security practice is characterized by successively more sophisticated objectives and more stringent success metrics. Overall, as you increase the level of maturity, you should expect higher cost of implementation. If you look at the framework, you can see that governance is more focused on the program itself, looking at more strategic elements such as strategy and metrics, policy and compliance, education and guidance, etc. We have renamed construction business function into design business function and introduced a new business function called implementation. Along with design, implementation, verification, operations, they cover the core of software development lifecycle. Design is focused on threat assessment at design level. Implementation is focused on secure build, secure deployment, and defect management aspects. And verification is more focused on testing and verifying aspects. And operations is focused on more of incident management, environment management, incident detection, response. All of these aspects are covered during the operations. So as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to spend some time on the implementation business function, because this is where this additional business function was added to the SAMM core framework from its predecessor. And the key goal we had in mind was how do we align with more latest industry practices such as DevOps and Agile, which has CI/CD is the integral part of that. And as a result of that, the security practices that we added to implementation business function are secure build, secure deployment, and defect management. Now let's take a closer look at some of the security practices. Each security practice is divided into two streams, A and B. The purpose of these streams is to align and link the objectives or activities within the practice or the different maturity levels. And each stream has an objective to be reached, and this objective can be reached in increasing level of maturity. This way, we ensure that there are no orphan activities that seem only relevant on a single maturity level. As I mentioned, the example is code signing in SAMM 1.5. Let's take a even more kind of a detailed, closer look at one of the security practices, which is requirements-driven testing. Under verification business function. So requirements-driven testing security practice is divided into two streams, control verification and misuse abuse testing. As you can see, the streams align and link the activities in the practice over different maturity levels. And each stream has an objective to be reached, and this objective can be reached in increasing levels of maturity. Now, I want to spend some time on how do you apply this particular model to your organization, literally starting from tomorrow. And at the end, I'll also show some of the resources which we have made available to everyone. And it's OWASP SAMM is an open source project, so you can literally go to the owassamm.org website and download all the resources that we have made it available there. So let's look at how do we apply this model to your organization. So this is a typical approach applying the model, where overall there are like 6 phases. First of all, when you're starting for the first time, the most critical function is or phase is a prepare phase. Then assessment, then setting this target, defining the plan, implementation, and rollout. And after that, again, starting with assessment, thus creating like a full life cycle, and it's a continuous improvement cycle. So this is basically where we wanted to make sure that once you start, it's an ongoing continuous improvement model. Let's look at the very first phase, which is the most critical phase in my mind for success of the SAMM application. It consists of following 4 activities. First, you have to define the scope. By that, what I mean is you have to identify, are you going to apply SAMM to the whole organization or your company, a particular business unit within a company, or a single project or an application? Once you define the scope, you have to identify what are the key stakeholders for that particular either business unit or that application or whole organization. And this is very important because once you identify the stakeholders, you have to get their buy-in. And once you get their buy-in, you should start spreading the word and evangelizing some of the SAMM activities. This is the most important phase because, as I mentioned, as part of this phase, you gain the buy-in. And same thing, like if you're starting small with one application or one project, and you gain the buy-in from the key stakeholders over there, when you expand, you have to repeat and you have to again get the buy-in. And this is the most critical aspect because this is where you need that type of support and buy-in from the key stakeholders, not just executive management, but also some of the key stakeholders. To measure current, once you have the buy-in, you start with the assessment to measure current level of maturity of your organization or project or business unit, whatever you level of granularity that you choose. You need to start with an assessment by conducting interviews with the key stakeholders to evaluate current security practices. We recommend in-person interviews or email. This way you can explain key intent behind some of these activities and clarify any potential questions or doubt your stakeholders might have. There are 3 ways in which you could perform an assessment. There's a lightweight assessment, detailed assessment, and a hybrid assessment. A lightweight assessment is simply interviewing key stakeholders and recording their response. During detailed assessment, you ask for evidence of performance and quality for each and every activity which they claim they are performing. In hybrid assessment, you kind of ask for evidence on a need-to-know basis for some of the activities and not all of the activities. My particular favorite assessment model is a hybrid assessment, because when you are part of the organization, you already know certain things are being performed or not with good quality or not. You only ask for evidence when you have some doubt, like, or you may think that the person may not have understood the full intent behind that particular question. That is when you collect more evidences. And it makes it also short. The assessment also becomes shorter. If you choose a detailed assessment, be cautious that it is going to take a longer time to collect all the evidences and things like that. Now, once you record all these responses, you can assign maturity levels using the SAMM worksheet. And that worksheet is available as part of the resources that we make available. Now, this is the high level. How do you calculate the maturity score? And we have changed some of the things. That's why I wanted to spend some time over this slide. So we came up with a new scoring model, which still primarily based on coverage, like SAMM 1.5. However, we added a quality criteria for each question, as you can see here, to add another dimension to the score. Our guidance is to score 0 if quality criteria are not met. Now, going back to one of the core SAMM principles of simplicity, we decided to add quality criteria for each question. This way, time to complete an assessment did not significantly increase with SAMM 2.0 versus SAMM 1.5 if you're already using SAMM 1.5. And by the way, SAMM 2.0 is not backward compatible with SAMM 1.5 because of some of the structural changes that we have made. Overall maturity score for the security practice is calculated by taking an average of maturity level 1 between stream A and stream B and adding that to each level of maturity. And that is how you calculate the score over here. Once you finish assessment, you need to define the target as per your organization's business drivers and risk profile. It is very important to spend some time to understand your organization's business drivers and particular risk profile during this exercise. Once you define this target, the most important step is to estimate the cost of implementation. Many SAMM initiatives fail when folks forget to estimate and plan increased cost of implementation, resulting in lack of resources dedicated to the security improvements that you have planned for. The cost of implementation would become direct input to defining a plan. During this step, you need to determine change schedule as per upcoming releases and develop or update your roadmap plan over the 4 or 5 phases. We recommend implementing SAMM changes over minimum 3 phases and maximum 5 phases, and each phase can span somewhere between 3 to 4 months to 12 months. In order to focus on the highest impact, you should start with high impact security improvements such as training and awareness, as well as threat assessment as part of design. Now, once the plan is defined, you have to start implementation. Implement activities using SAMM 2.0 guide. Again, SAMM 2.0 guide is available as part of the resources that we provide at OWASPSAMM.org website. Leverage other OWASP projects as well. Like I gave some example of some of the other OWASP projects that you could leverage as part of the implementation. But this is very small subset of OWASP projects. OWASP has almost about 200 open source security projects. So it's full of rich information. And I highly encourage you to go and visit OWASP in general and see what are some of the projects that you can leverage as part of the implementation. SAMM aspires to become the umbrella project for all OWASP projects. And what I mean by that is each OWASP project can map back to one of the SAMM business functions and security practices. Here are some of the examples, but some of the OWASP projects, as I mentioned earlier, they could map back to multiple OWASP SAMM business functions, such as OWASP Top 10 and OWASP Mobile Top 10. After you implement, you need to start rolling out this, need to create and update scorecards on regular interval by capturing scores from before and after an an iteration of the assurance program build out, and communicate progress to the management. I have personally used these scorecards to demonstrate and communicate security improvements to the highest level of management in the companies I worked at. This helped management visualize the progress in overall security improvements. So this is very important to continue to get their buy-in. Here's some of the resources which are available, and we have to get you started using SAMM 2.0. All these resources are linked to the OWASPSAMM.org website. So if you forget all these resources, just remember one website, which is OWASPSAMM.org, and everything is linked to that particular website. You don't have to remember anything, just if you have to take one key takeaway from this is OWASPSAMM.org website. There's lots of resources available over there, including the toolbox, what we call is an Excel spreadsheet, which helps you create an assessment and build out a plan or roadmap for security improvements. Now, one more thing before I end this talk is OWASP SAMM benchmark initiative. So we recently introduced this benchmark initiative, which helps answer the question, how do I compare to other organizations across the world? And SAMM benchmark initiative is inspired by BSIMM. As I mentioned earlier, BSIMM is the one great thing about BSIMM is it tells you how does your organization compare with other organizations following security assurance program. The goal of this project is to collect the most comprehensive data set related to the organizational maturity of application or software assurance programs. And if you're concerned about sharing your data, just rest assured that the data collection is anonymized and it will not be shared like, hey, this name company has this gaps in their security. So just keep that in mind that we are very well aware, we are all security professionals and privacy professionals, so we are very well aware of that fact, and that's why we are collecting this data with anonymized data. So in terms of the future direction, we wanted to have now more faster and iterative versions. It took almost like a little over 3 years between the SAMM 1.5 and 2.0. We also wanted to become this SAMM as an umbrella project for all other OWASP projects. That way it becomes easy for people who are not familiar with OWASP in general to see what implementation projects can be applied to those SAMM projects. And we have aspiration for starting online assessment and roadmaps. But again, we are ways away from that goal, but this is one of the aspirations that we have in mind. As someone said, proof of the pudding is it in eating it. If you haven't tried yet, I invite you to please try using OWASP SAMM starting from tomorrow. Any questions, concerns, anything, any feedback, feel free to reach out to me at my Gmail and hit me up on LinkedIn as well. Having said that, thank you very much. Thank you to BSidesPorto organizers, volunteers, and sponsors for putting together this great first BSides conference in Porto, and looking forward to visiting in person next year. And thanks to all of you for listening to this talk.
Thank you, Hardik. Thank you for your presentation. Just let me know that I've used it, the SAMM model for teaching purposes 2 years ago or 3 years ago, the 2016 version, and I found it useful and well documented. So the list of questions and everything is well documented. So that's good. I saw 2 changes from that version from here. The major change was the replacement of the construction or the division of the construction phase by the design and implementation phase. I have two quick questions, and there are no other questions, so I will do it very quickly. It's more a curiosity than questions by themselves. Do you have an idea about how widely is SAMM used?
Yeah, so this is one of the great, we know that it is being used widely across the globe. We have talked to people, like we keep collecting feedback from people across the globe, in New Zealand, Australia, Japan, Europe, various places in Europe, in US. So it's extremely widely utilized model. However, that is why we launched this OWASP benchmark initiative, where we wanted to be more concrete in terms of we wanted to see exactly, we want to measure, like, how many organizations are using it and which type or which size of organizations are using it and all of that. And I'm very well aware that there are some startups, and they even have it as part of their job description that, like, familiarity with OWASP SAMM is useful. So even some startups are using, not just big companies. So it's very widely utilized. But again, this is one of the reasons we launched this OWASP SAMM benchmark initiative, to collect specific data so that we can share the anonymized data with the rest of the world.
And concerning the benchmark was also an issue that came to my mind, because I think the things work better when you compare different organizations in that case, because they influence each other and they try to improve to get better results. So you create a dynamic.
Exactly.
But at the same time, I found an issue, or it could be an issue, and which profile should conduct the interviews? Have you an idea about the profile a guy inside an organization? Which profile should he have? Should be the project manager? Should be a developer? Because it touches in governance, also in production stage, the broad area. So, which profile do you think it's better?
That's a great feedback. We can also take it back and make it a little more clear. So there are two different high level that what we have seen in the industry is, one profile is internal and the one is external. So internal is, I think your question is more towards like internal, but let me first address the external. There are many application security consultants. They are very well versed in OWASP SAMM, and they come in and they do the assessment, and they help create a roadmap and plan and all these things. However, that's not required at all. It's designed with this fungibility in mind, that you can also create internal assessment yourself. And in order to do the internal assessment, it's again, like, there is no specific, like, you don't have to have the knowledge, like you don't have to be a security engineer, so to speak. This can be created by a project manager, product manager, security engineer. It really varies based on what kind of resources you have in your organization. And I'll give you an example. Some of the companies I worked at, a security engineer or security team created this assessment. So there are some organizations where I have seen product or program managers, they're using this particular, so it really varies across the industry. There is no, and that is one of the reasons we provided so much of documentation and make it more of like a descriptive enough, so that you don't need to have a detailed security knowledge in order to conduct an assessment or build a plan.
Yeah, but I think the perception could be different, and it could create some difficulties to the benchmark, to the comparison. But I think if you document the profile, it could be interesting. Yeah. Thank you one more time, Hardik.